Not everyone who drains you raises their voice. Some do it with a smile. And if you're not paying attention, you might even thank them for it. Because some of the most dangerous people you'll ever meet will come wrapped in charm. They won't storm into your life shouting orders or making demands. In fact, they'll likely show up with a compliment, a helping hand, a comforting word at the right moment. They'll offer to listen when others don't. They'll ask how you're feeling, remember small details, and position themselves as your biggest supporter. But behind that kindness, behind the timing, the interest, the warmth, there is calculation. They're not there to connect. They're there to gain access to your thoughts, your doubts, your trust, and eventually your peace of mind. This is what makes emotional manipulation so difficult to spot. It doesn't wear a mask of malice. It wears the face of a friend. The Stoics saw this clearly. Long before psychology gave us the vocabulary, they gave us the warning signs. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The closer someone pretends to be, the more cautious you should become." Not because all closeness is false, but because some closeness is a performance. Some intimacy is an act. And some people don't want to know you. They want to study you, not to admire you, but to use you. And if you're not grounded in your own awareness, you'll mistake attention for care. You'll confuse empathy with interest. And worst of all, you'll hand over the blueprint to your inner world, thinking you're building connection, when in reality, you're giving someone a map to manipulate you. I've seen this too many times. I've felt it myself. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, a friend of mine, let's call him Aaron, was going through a major career shift. He'd just left a high-paying job to pursue a path that felt more meaningful. He was scared, uncertain, and very open about it. During that time, he grew close to someone in his circle, someone who always seemed supportive. We'll call him Brandon. Brandon always listened. He asked the right questions. He offered words of encouragement. But months later, when Aaron was up for a big opportunity, Brandon changed. He started dropping subtle doubts. "Are you sure you're ready? I just don't want you to get disappointed." Or, "It's okay if you're still figuring things out. Not everyone is built for this kind of pressure." Aaron didn't notice it at first. The words felt like concern, but over time he began to second-guess himself. Delay decisions, shrink his goals. What happened? Brandon had collected Aaron's fears, and now he was using them. This is the kind of power manipulators seek, not to break you down directly, but to get you to do it to yourself. And this is why Stoic philosophy remains so relevant. It teaches us that not every enemy is loud, not every threat is obvious, and not every smile means safety, but it also teaches us that we're not helpless. You don't need to confront every manipulator with anger. You don't need to argue, expose, or escalate. You simply need to become someone they can't access. The Stoic way isn't about isolation, it's about discipline, emotional discipline, mental clarity, inner boundaries that don't need to be shouted to be felt. Because when you see clearly, you can choose carefully. And when you stop offering every piece of yourself to people who haven't earned it, something powerful happens. You become unreadable, untouchable, unshakable. So if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling drained, feeling like your thoughts were scattered or your energy was gone, not because of what was said, but who said it, pay attention to that. Sometimes it's not what people do that harms you. It's how they get you to respond, to doubt yourself, to over-explain, to say yes when you wanted to say no, to open up when you should have held back. That's the real trick of manipulation. It gets you to willingly participate. And the moment you start giving your power away like that, it becomes harder and harder to recognize what's actually happening. So how do we stop this? How do we protect our inner world without becoming cold or suspicious of everyone? That's where Stoicism becomes your compass. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, these weren't detached philosophers hiding from life. They were men in power navigating politics, betrayal, conflict, and chaos. And yet, they didn't react emotionally. They didn't give their energy to every opinion, every rumor, every emotional tug. They practiced strategic silence, intentional awareness. They trained themselves to observe more than they spoke and to trust action more than words. That's what this video is about. Not how to beat manipulators at their own game, but how to step out of the game entirely. How to stop over-explaining your worth to people who've already made up their minds. How to stop oversharing with people who only pretend to care. How to build the kind of quiet confidence that makes you immune, not because you're hiding, but because you're anchored. This doesn't mean we shut down. It doesn't mean we stop trusting. It means we learn to discern, to know when someone is truly listening versus when they are just gathering data, to sense when someone's warmth is genuine and when it's a disguise, to pause before giving away our fears, our goals, our deepest truths, because not everyone who asked has earned the right to receive. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore this more deeply. We'll break down how manipulators use your own emotions against you and how you can stop them without ever raising your voice. We'll learn how silence, clarity, and calm presence can become the greatest defense against those who rely on confusion and chaos. And most of all, we'll remember this. Your energy is yours. Your clarity is yours. And no one, no matter how charming, deserves access to your inner world without proving they'll protect it. Let's begin. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is reveal too much to the wrong person. Because manipulators don't need to raise their voice. They don't need to threaten, demand, or even argue. All they really need is your openness, your willingness to expose what scares you, what haunts you, what keeps you up at night. And once you give them that, the work is almost done. They now have a lever, and they'll use it quietly. You see, most people imagine manipulation as something aggressive, intimidation, guilt-tripping, emotional outbursts. But in truth, the most effective manipulation is often subtle, soft-spoken, disguised as care. And it usually begins when you share a fear of not being enough, a fear of being alone, a fear of failing, or of being misunderstood. These fears are deeply human. We all have them. But in the wrong hands, they become tools of control. And most people don't even realize they're handing over those tools until it's too late. That's why the Stoics warned us, not against vulnerability, but against careless vulnerability. Epictetus once said, "It's not things that upset us, but our opinions about things." And manipulators, they study those opinions, especially the ones you voice in moments of weakness. They learn your patterns, not because they admire you, but because they plan to use them against you. Let me share a story with you. There was a woman I once coached. Her name was Jordan. She was a brilliant graphic designer in her late 20s, finally starting to get recognition after years of working behind the scenes. One night, she shared something vulnerable with a close colleague named Claire. They'd bonded over long work hours and occasional drinks, and Jordan felt safe enough to admit something personal, that her parents had never truly supported her career path, that she often felt like she was still trying to prove herself, that deep down she feared being seen as just creative, but not capable. Claire nodded. She offered reassurance. She said, "You're amazing. Don't ever let anyone dim your light." It felt comforting. But weeks later, something shifted. During a client meeting, Jordan spoke up with a bold new concept. It was unconventional but promising. The room was quiet, and just before the creative director responded, Claire leaned in and said with a laugh, "Well, Jordan always has something to prove." It sounded like a joke, but it landed like a knife. Jordan shrunk back into herself. That moment of courage, gone. What Claire had done wasn't technically cruel. She hadn't yelled, insulted, or attacked. All she'd done was echo a fear Jordan had once whispered in confidence and used it to reestablish control, to put Jordan back in a box. That's the trap. Your fears, when weaponized by someone else, no longer belong to you. They're turned into strings. And once someone has a string, they can pull it whenever they like. This is where the Stoic path offers a powerful alternative. It doesn't tell you to become cold. It doesn't ask you to hide your emotions. What it teaches is something more subtle and far more empowering: discernment. Before you speak, pause. Before you share, reflect. Before you open your heart to someone, ask yourself, is this for my growth or for someone else's advantage? Not every listener is safe. Not every question deserves an answer. And not everyone who seemed curious about your life deserves access to your inner world. So what can you do? The first practice is this: observe before revealing. If someone consistently shows up with empathy, stability, and discretion, that's one thing. But if someone is always present for your pain, but absent for your joy, or quick to probe but slow to share anything of themselves, take note. That's not emotional intimacy. That's information harvesting. The second practice is to become comfortable with silence. Most people overshare because silence makes them nervous, because they think connection requires confession. But true connection doesn't need you to constantly explain yourself. In fact, the people who are safest to open up to won't rush you. They'll earn your trust through time, through consistency, through quiet respect. And the third, ask yourself this simple question before disclosing something personal. What do I hope will happen if I share this? If your answer is, I want to feel closer, or I want to be understood, that's okay. But also ask, what might happen if this is repeated, twisted, or misunderstood? Stoicism isn't about expecting betrayal, but it is about being anchored enough not to be surprised by it. It's about accepting the nature of people, good and bad, and choosing to protect your peace without turning bitter. When you start practicing this kind of inner discipline, something changes. You begin to carry your fears differently, not as secrets, but as sacred truths, not to be hidden in shame, but protected in strength. Because someone who has trained their mind not to be ruled by fear becomes unreadable to those who depend on emotional chaos. When they try to guilt you, they're met with calm. When they try to corner you, you stay grounded. When they try to predict you, they fail because you're no longer operating from your old insecurities. And that's the power the Stoics spoke of. Not power over others, but power within. So no, you don't need to reveal your wounds to everyone who asks. You don't need to explain your past to feel worthy. You don't need to hand over your doubts to people who've never shown you they'll hold them with care. Your fears aren't flaws, but they are gateways, and anyone who walks through them should be invited, not allowed in by default. In a world obsessed with being real, we forget. Not all realness is wise, and not all vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability with boundaries, that's strength. That's awareness. That's self-respect. The next time someone pushes for more than you're ready to share, remember this. You don't owe anyone your fear. You don't owe anyone your inner turmoil. What you owe is to yourself, to be patient, to be discerning, to be whole enough that even when fear knocks on the door, you decide who gets to hear it and who doesn't. That's where self-mastery begins, not with control over the world, but with stewardship over your own heart. Most manipulators don't need to raise their voice. They don't need to twist your arm or back you into a corner. Instead, they simply plant a thought and let you believe it's your own. That's their real power, not force, but suggestion. And the moment you begin to believe what they want you to believe, without pausing to question it, they've already done half the work. You've handed over your judgment. In today's world, where headlines scream for attention and people form opinions after reading a single sentence, this danger is everywhere. A rumor doesn't need to be true, it just needs to feel true. A story doesn't need facts, it just needs emotion. And if you're not careful, you'll end up acting on someone else's story, living inside someone else's version of reality. The Stoics saw this clearly. Marcus Aurelius warned, if someone tells you a person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses. Simply respond. He was ignorant of my other faults, or he would have mentioned those too. There's a kind of calm power in that, a refusal to react, a refusal to chase every accusation or defend every whisper. Instead, it's an invitation to pause, to observe, to ask the harder question, is this even true? But in practice, that's not always easy, especially when the words come from someone who seems kind, trustworthy, or well-meaning. Let me tell you about a man named Ethan. Ethan worked at a small marketing agency in Seattle. He was thoughtful, reliable, and well-liked. But when a new team member, Madison, joined the company, things shifted. Madison had that magnetic charm. She was quick to make friends, quick to compliment, quick to get close. Within weeks, she seemed to know everything about everyone, who was burned out, who felt overlooked, who wanted more recognition. One day over coffee, Madison leaned in and told Ethan something that stuck in his mind. You know, she said gently, I heard the creative director doesn't think you're assertive enough to lead big campaigns. But don't worry, I see your potential. I think you're the real creative heart of the team. At first, Ethan was grateful. He felt seen, understood. But over the next few days, that seed began to grow. He started doubting himself, replaying past meetings in his head, wondering what people said about him when he wasn't around. He became quieter, more withdrawn, second-guessing his input in every meeting. Eventually, he confronted his manager, only to find out there had been no such feedback, no concerns, no complaints. The entire story was fabricated, and by the time he realized that, the damage had already been done. His confidence had cracked, his trust in others had eroded, and his sense of stability was shaken, not by what was real, but by what he had believed without question. That's the danger when you give away your ability to verify, to slow down, to ask, where is this information coming from? You become easy to guide, easy to sway, easy to manipulate, and manipulators count on this. They know most people want to believe the best in others. They know we crave connection, belonging, clarity. And they weaponize that desire by appearing sincere, appearing concerned, appearing like they're just trying to help. But underneath that appearance, there's often something else. an agenda, a tilt, a quiet attempt to reshape your view of the world just enough to serve their needs. That's why Stoicism trains us to believe slowly, not to become paranoid, but to become deliberate. The Stoic doesn't react just because something sounds urgent. They don't believe something just because it feels flattering. And they don't adopt someone else's view just because it comes wrapped in friendship. Instead, they ask, what does this person gain if I believe this? Is this an objective fact or a filtered opinion? What assumptions am I making right now, and are they even mine? Because truth doesn't rush. It doesn't pressure. It doesn't whisper. Don't think, just trust me. That's the language of deception. If someone says something that makes you feel afraid, angry, ashamed, or overly flattered, pause. Don't jump to agree or defend. That's the sacred space the Stoics spoke of. The space between stimulus and response. That's where your power lives. In a world where even our friends and family can speak from fear, insecurity, or bias, we have to become our own filter. We have to protect our perception like we protect our peace. And that starts by asking questions, not to challenge everything, but to clarify anything. When someone brings you a story about a person you care about, when someone hints at rumors or concerns you've never heard before, when someone tells you a truth that's just a little too perfectly aligned with your worst fears or deepest hopes, ask yourself, does this need to be believed right now or examined first? Because the moment you pause, you regain control. The Stoic isn't gullible, but they're also not cynical. They live in the middle space, open-minded but not open to everything. Willing to listen, but not willing to surrender discernment. And here's what's most important. When you live this way, manipulators begin to lose interest because they can't get under your skin. They can't bait you with flattery. They can't hijack your emotions. You've taken back the steering wheel, and now they're no longer in control. This discipline, this slow belief, this measured response, it's a muscle. You won't master it overnight, but every time you choose reflection over reaction, you strengthen it. So the next time someone tries to make you rush to judgment, remember, you don't owe anyone a reaction. You don't owe anyone instant agreement. What you owe is your clarity. What you owe is your judgment, and that is yours alone to protect. Most people think their weakest moments come during pain, during heartbreak, loss, or failure, and that's true sometimes. But what we often forget is that joy can be just as dangerous, not because joy is bad, but because in moments of happiness, we tend to let our guard down. We stop questioning things. We say yes too quickly. We assume the world is safe simply because we feel good. And that's exactly when manipulation walks in, disguised as opportunity, closeness, or generosity. The Stoics understood this paradox well. Seneca once wrote, "No emotion, even joy, should be allowed to overthrow reason." To the Stoic, joy is not the problem. Unexamined joy is. When we're grieving or anxious, we're cautious. We scan for threats. We hold back. But when we're celebrating, when things are going our way, we tend to invite everyone in, say yes to every offer, and assume that good feelings mean good intentions. That's how people get hurt, not in crisis, but in triumph. Let me share a story. There was a man named Caleb. He had worked for years building his own design consultancy, starting from scratch in his garage. After landing a major contract with a well-known brand, he felt like he had finally made it. For the first time in years, he could breathe. He could enjoy the moment. People congratulated him. Friends and old acquaintances reached out with praise. And then came Patrick. Patrick was someone Caleb had met briefly in a business seminar years ago. Out of nowhere, he reconnected. "Man, I heard the news. Huge win. Listen, I've got something perfect for you," he said. "Private investment opportunity. Early stage, very quiet, very exclusive. I wasn't going to offer it to anyone else, but this fits you." Still riding the wave of victory, Caleb didn't think twice. He trusted the tone. He trusted the moment. He invested. And 6 months later, he realized it had all been smoke and mirrors. There was no company, no return, no Patrick. The money hurt, sure, but what cut deeper was the realization that he'd let his joy silence his judgment, that he didn't pause, that he didn't ask the hard questions, that he mistook a high point in life as proof that everything else must be just as good. And that's what manipulators count on. They wait, not for your low points, but for your open points, your celebratory moments, your unguarded laughter, your glowing optimism. Because that's when the walls come down. That's when logic sleeps. And that's when people say yes to things they would never agree to under calmer conditions. There was another story I once heard about a woman named Marissa. After years of healing from past relationships, she finally found a partner who made her feel truly seen. They had just moved in together. Friends said she was glowing. She was finally safe. During a small family gathering, her partner's cousin pulled her aside and said, "Hey, now that you're part of the family, I was wondering if you could help out. Nothing big, just a little loan to cover an unexpected car repair. It'll stay between us." Marissa hesitated, but she didn't want to seem cold. She didn't want to ruin the mood. So she said yes. It didn't end with one request. It snowballed. More favors, more pressure, and when she finally said no, suddenly she was painted as selfish, divisive, ungrateful. She wasn't taken advantage of because she was weak. She was taken advantage of because she was happy. That's a bitter truth. Joy can make us generous, but if we're not careful, it also makes us careless. That's why Stoicism teaches us something that feels counterintuitive. Pause before celebrating out loud. Reflect before saying yes in a moment of high emotion. Write things down. Let time test the clarity of an offer. Personally, one of the most effective habits I've built from this teaching is what I call the 48-hour clarity rule. Whenever something exciting happens, a promotion, a deal, an award, I let myself feel it fully. I celebrate inwardly, but I don't say yes to anything immediately. Instead, I write down the opportunities that show up because of that good news, and then I wait. 48 hours, no exceptions. If, after 2 days, the opportunity still makes sense, if it still aligns with my values, my goals, my peace of mind, I'll proceed. But more often than not, after the high settles, I see things differently. I see who was genuinely excited for me and who was just positioning themselves to benefit. This one practice has saved me more pain than I can count. Because what Stoicism really teaches is this: not all emotions are meant to guide decisions. Joy is to be honored, not obeyed, celebrated, not surrendered to. That's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved." That includes the wave of happiness, not just hardship. So if you've ever made a decision in a moment of excitement that later turned to regret, know this: you're not alone. It happens to all of us. It doesn't mean you're naive. It means you're human. but you don't have to keep repeating it. The next time something wonderful happens, pause. Let the joy pass through you. Don't rush to act. Don't confuse flattery with truth. Don't mistake the timing of the moment for the integrity of the offer, because the people who truly respect your success will never pressure you to compromise in the glow of it. And the people who don't will often reveal themselves the moment you say, "Let me think about it." That phrase alone can be your first filter. So ask yourself, if I wasn't in a good mood right now, would I still want this? Would I still say yes? Would I still believe this person's words? If the answer isn't clear, wait. Clarity always follows stillness. And finally, let's remember this. Joy to the Stoic is not loud. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't crave recognition. It simply is a steady flame that warms from within. It's not the kind of joy that makes you say yes to everyone. It's the kind that makes you want to protect what's real. Not because you're afraid of losing it, but because you finally know how much it's worth. And that kind of joy, that's what no manipulator can touch. Manipulation doesn't always begin with pressure. Sometimes it begins with kindness, and not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that shows up when you need help. The kind that makes you feel grateful. The kind that feels like generosity until it isn't. There's a subtle but powerful trap that many people fall into, and it's built on something we're all taught to value: reciprocity. If someone does something nice for you, you return the favor. It's basic human decency. But manipulators don't just understand this. They weaponize it. They offer help, not to lift you up, but to own a piece of you. And once you accept, they wait until you feel obligated, until you hesitate to say no, until you stop acting from your values and start acting from your guilt. That's how favors become chains, not because you're ungrateful, but because you didn't realize the favor had a price tag. The Stoics understood this dynamic long before we had a name for it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." It sounds simple, but it cuts to the heart of this trap. If your actions aren't coming from your own reasoning, whose will are you following? Let me tell you about someone named Rachel. She was a young attorney at a boutique firm, driven, ambitious, and eager to prove herself. In her first year, she caught the attention of a senior partner named Greg. He took her under his wing, gave her tips, covered for her during a client call when she got flustered, praised her in meetings, encouraged her to speak up. Rachel was deeply grateful. Greg was respected, and she felt lucky to have his support. But slowly things shifted. It started with a late-night favor, helping him rewrite a brief he'd neglected. Then it was taking the blame for a miscommunication with a client. Then it was staying behind to polish up files that Greg had failed to deliver on time. And every time she hesitated, he reminded her, subtly but clearly, "After everything I've done for you, this is the least you could do." Rachel started to feel trapped. Saying no felt disloyal, like a betrayal, but saying yes, it made her bitter, anxious, resentful. She wasn't working late because she loved the job. She was doing it because she owed someone. That's not loyalty. That's quiet coercion. And it doesn't just happen in the workplace. It happens in friendships, in family, in community. It happens anytime someone gives, not to empower you, but to create leverage over you. Here's another example. I once met a man named Victor at a personal development retreat. Years ago, he'd gone through a difficult financial period, An older friend, Tom, had offered him a room in his house rent-free for 3 months. It changed Victor's life. He was truly grateful. But even after Victor got back on his feet, Tom kept bringing it up. I gave you a roof when you had nothing. Whenever Victor wanted to make a decision that didn't align with Tom's opinions, whether it was about a relationship or even a vacation, Tom would say things like, "If it weren't for me, you wouldn't be where you are." And Victor found himself shrinking, saying yes to things he didn't want, avoiding conversations he feared would disappoint his so-called mentor. That's not guidance, that's manipulation dressed in memory. The Stoic path offers a different way forward. Gratitude is noble, but it should never override your judgment. Just because someone helped you doesn't mean they now get to shape your choices. And just because you feel thankful doesn't mean you owe yourself respect. Seneca wrote, "No man has lived a fulfilled life if he gives everything away without thought. That includes your time, your energy, your integrity." So what can we do? First, we must practice self-inquiry. When someone asks something of you, ask yourself, am I doing this because I believe it's right, or because I'm afraid of what they'll say if I say no? Is this an act of kindness or a payment on a debt I never agreed to? Does this serve my values or just their comfort? The second step is to establish your limits early, not after you've been pushed, but before. Limits are not walls, they are clarity. They let people know how to love you, how to work with you, how to respect you. And if someone takes offense at your boundaries, that tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. Because people who care about you don't need to trap you to keep you close. And third, we must learn to sit with discomfort. Saying no will sometimes feel hard, especially to someone who once helped you. But the truth is, manipulation thrives on emotional discomfort, on your fear of seeming ungrateful. That's why the simple sentence, "I can't do that," is so powerful. You don't need a long excuse. You don't need to apologize. You just need to stand in your reason. Because the moment you start sacrificing your peace just to keep someone else comfortable, you're no longer being generous. You're being controlled. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they once spoke up for you. You don't owe anyone your compliance just because they once said yes when no one else would. True generosity comes from freedom, not pressure. And a favor that turns into leverage was never a gift. It was bait. The Stoics teach us to give when we choose, not when we're cornered, to serve with conviction, not with compulsion, and to say thank you without surrendering ourselves. So the next time someone reminds you of everything they have done for you, pause and remember this: your value is not measured by how much you give away. It's measured by how well you protect what matters most: your time, your truth, your ability to act from reason, not guilt. And if someone can't respect your limits, they were never honoring the connection. They were controlling the transaction. The more you live in alignment with your own values, the harder it becomes for anyone to twist them. Set limits. Not because you're selfish, but because your peace is not a loan to be repaid. It's a birthright to be guarded. Not every question is asked out of care. Not every listener is safe. And not every conversation is a place to be known. We live in a world that constantly encourages us to open up, to be real, to share our truth. But here's the reality. Not everyone who asks about your life is asking for your benefit. Some are just mapping your weaknesses. Manipulation doesn't always start with control. Sometimes it starts with curiosity. And the people who do it best, they rarely talk about themselves. They ask, they numb, they listen, they make you feel seen, safe, even special. But what they're really doing is gathering information, building a psychological file on you, so that when the time comes, they know exactly where to press, what to question, where the cracks are. The Stoics saw this with remarkable clarity. Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." And he wasn't just calling for humility. He was describing a strategy for self-preservation. Because what you say, especially about your fears, your regrets, your insecurities, can be turned against you in the hands of the wrong person. And once it's out there, you can't take it back. Let me tell you about someone I once knew. Her name was Dana. Dana had just started a new job at a nonprofit organization. She was enthusiastic, passionate, and eager to connect with her team. On her second week, she formed a fast friendship with a colleague named Elise. Elise was warm, funny, and full of questions. She'd say things like, "You seem so grounded. What's your story?" Or, "You've got such calm energy. Were you always like this?" Dana opened up. She shared stories about past struggles, burnout, therapy, a complicated relationship with her mother. It felt good to be that honest, especially in a new environment. But then things started to shift. In meetings, Elise would occasionally mention something that made Dana feel exposed. She'd say, "I'm sure Dana's feeling overwhelmed again. She said she tends to overcommit." Or, "You know how she takes things personally sometimes." She said it with a smile, a soft tone, but the words landed hard. Dana realized too late her truth had become someone else's leverage. And here's the part that's even harder. Elise never lied. She just repeated pieces of Dana's story, rephrased with just enough edge to create doubt. Doubt in her coworkers, doubt in her manager, doubt in Dana herself. That's how manipulation often works. Not through aggression, but through quiet exposure. Not through force, but through misplaced trust. Now you might ask, should we never be open with people? Should we never share what we're going through? No, that's not Stoicism. That's isolation. What the Stoics teach us is discernment, the wisdom to know when to speak, how much to say, and to whom. There's a difference between being honest and being exposed. A difference between sharing to connect and sharing to be liked. And the people who use your vulnerability against you, they rarely show their own. That's your first signal. If you're always the one answering questions, always the one opening up, always the one revealing, while the other person reveals nothing, that's not a relationship. That's an interrogation. And yet, it's easy to miss, especially if we grew up believing that openness equals connection, that the faster you share, the more authentic you are. But authenticity is not measured by how fast you trust. It's measured by how intentionally you do. Let me share one more story. Marcus, a well-respected meditation teacher, once confided in a peer named Julian after a retreat. He spoke about his occasional struggles with imposter syndrome and how he sometimes felt disconnected from his own teachings. Julian listened closely, offered a few kind words, and said little about himself. Months later, when Marcus was nominated for a leadership role in their wellness collective, Julian raised concerns, privately at first, then subtly in meetings. "I just think we should consider someone who isn't currently wrestling with personal doubts," he said. No one else knew what Marcus had shared in confidence. Julian hadn't fabricated anything. He'd simply weaponized a moment of trust. at just the right time. And this is the heart of it. Manipulators don't always lie. They don't always invent stories. Sometimes they simply wait for you to hand them the truth. So what can we do? First, practice intentional silence. You don't have to fill every pause in conversation with the confession. You don't owe anyone your history just because they're curious, and you're not cold or closed off for keeping parts of yourself private. Second, notice patterns. Are you doing all the emotional labor in the relationship? Are they listening but never offering? Saying but never revealing? True connection is mutual vulnerability, not one-sided exposure. Third, remember this guiding question. Will sharing this strengthen the relationship or weaken my peace? Because not everyone who seems safe is, and not everyone who smiles intends well. The Stoics never said to shut the world out, but they did say to guard your citadel, your inner fortress, to speak with purpose, to choose when to reveal and when to remain quiet. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." I'd add this, it also becomes shaped by the conversations it surrenders to and the people it lets inside. So if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling lighter, more whole, more understood, that's someone who deserves your story. But if you've ever walked away feeling exposed, off balance, uncertain, that was not a safe space. Trust that. And here's one last truth. You are not required to share just because someone asks. You are not obligated to give people your pain to make them feel close. And if someone pushes, manipulates, or guilts you into speaking when you don't want to, that's not connection. That's control. The more you learn to protect what you reveal, the stronger you become. Not guarded, but grounded. Not silent, but sovereign. Because what you choose not to say often says the most about your strength. You don't need to become cold. You don't need to shut people out or silence every part of yourself just to feel safe. That's not strength. That's fear pretending to be wisdom. But you do need to understand this. Caution is not weakness. Discernment is not paranoia. And boundaries, quiet, thoughtful boundaries, are not walls. They are doors with locks you control. Manipulators aren't afraid of people who fight back. They're not bothered by people who argue or shout. In fact, they often enjoy chaos. It makes you easier to read. But what truly unsettles them is clarity, stillness, a calm refusal to play the game. They don't fear your strength. They fear your self-possession. Because someone who no longer reacts on cue, who no longer explains out of guilt, who no longer hands over their fears like currency, becomes unreachable. And when you stop being predictable, you stop being controllable. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you ask, do I believe this because it's true or because it comforts me? Every time you choose silence over confession, distance over overexposure, observation over assumption, you're reclaiming something sacred, your mind. And when you protect your mind, you protect your life. Let me share something a woman named Simone once told me. She spent years being the open one, the friend who always shared first, the coworker who tried to make everyone feel comfortable, the daughter who explained herself even when no one asked. But one day after a long string of betrayals and misunderstandings, she stopped. Not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. She said, I thought being open made me real, but it made me vulnerable to the wrong people. When I started speaking less, but living more deliberately, my peace returned. That's the shift. Not towards silence, but towards sovereignty. Because the goal isn't to isolate yourself. The goal is to live with such awareness, such clarity, that you no longer give away pieces of yourself to people who haven't earned them. That's Stoicism. Not an escape from life, but a deeper entrance into it, with your eyes open, your heart anchored, and your mind clear. So if you've ever felt like you were too exposed, if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling uneasy but couldn't explain why, if you've ever wondered whether you're too sensitive or maybe not careful enough, then you're not alone. You're waking up. And here's what I want you to remember. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to defend every feeling. You just need to be more anchored in yourself. Because a person who is anchored doesn't get swept up in every storm. They stand, they breathe, they choose. And that kind of presence, that kind of power, no manipulator can reach. Now, if this message spoke to you, if something in your heart said, yes, I've lived this, I needed to hear this, then I want to invite you to stay on this journey with us. We share videos like this every single day, not for entertainment, but for transformation, for the quiet warriors of the seniors, for the thinkers, the feelers, the ones who've been too open for too long and are finally ready to live with clarity. So if that's you, consider subscribing. And if this message gave you a new way to see yourself, your boundaries, or your past, share it, not just by sending it to someone else, but by leaving a comment below. Tell us, what's one thing you're going to protect more moving forward? Your time, your attention, your silence. We'd love to hear your voice. Not the version that over-explains, but the one that stands in its truth. Because your growth doesn't need to be loud. Your clarity doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be real. You don't have to fight to reclaim your peace. You don't have to beg to be understood. You just have to return to your own lane, your own pace, your own judgment. That's how we win, not with noise, but with quiet mastery. And you're not alone in it.